The gunshot shattered the Montana night like thunder. Silas Redwood stood on his cabin porch, breathing hard, his weathered hands gripping the smoking revolver. The cold winter air burned his lungs, but he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the young man sprawled in the dirt before him, blood blooming across his shirt like a terrible flower. "You killed my nephew," a voice emerged from the darkness. Silas didn't flinch. He'd been waiting for this moment for 23 years. A figure materialized from the shadows. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face half hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The moonlight caught the silver in his beard and the cold fury in his eyes. "He came for the box," Silas replied, his voice a rough whisper. "Just like you, Hollister. Just like 23 years ago when you killed my brother." The old pain in Silas's leg flared suddenly, as if remembering the bullet that had shattered his knee on that blood-soaked night so long ago. He fought to stay upright, refusing to show weakness. "I've been waiting for you," Silas said, his breath forming ghosts in the frigid air. "A long time." Hollister's hand hovered near his holster. "Not as long as I've waited for this moment." Say on. 6 months earlier, Montana winters had a way of stripping a man down to his essence. Silas Redwood knew this better than most. At 68, he'd survived more winters than many men in these parts, though there were days when he questioned why he'd bothered. The wind howled outside his cabin, driving snow against the windows like handfuls of thrown salt. Silas sat in his rocking chair by the fire, a worn Bible open on his lap, though his eyes weren't on the text. They rarely were these days. The reading was just habit, like everything else in his life. Tending the cattle, mending fences, surviving. He glanced at the mantel where a faded photograph sat in a simple wooden frame. A beautiful, dark-haired woman with intelligent eyes and a gentle smile holding a young girl with the same thoughtful expression. Margaret and Sarah, wife and daughter, gone 23 years now. Silas closed the Bible without marking his place. He'd start from the same spot tomorrow as he did every night. He rose stiffly, his bad leg protesting. The old bullet wound never healed right, leaving him with a permanent limp, a physical reminder of what he'd lost, as if the memories weren't burden enough. The cabin was small but solid, built by his own hands when he'd brought Margaret here as a bride 30 years ago. Back then, he'd been Silas Redwood, the legendary lawman, the former bounty hunter who tracked down the Wilson gang through 3 territories. The man whose name made outlaws tremble from Dakota to the Mexican border. Now he was just an old rancher with a small herd of cattle living out his days in solitude. He made his nightly circuit of the cabin, checking the locks, though no one had come calling in months. Winter in these parts had a way of sealing a man off from the world. He paused at Sarah's bedroom door, as he did every night. It remained exactly as it had been when she died at 16. The patchwork quilt Margaret had made still on the bed books, arranged on the shelf, a silver hairbrush on the dresser. Beside the bed hung Margaret's painting of an ancient wooden box with strange carvings, the last thing she'd painted before they died. Sometimes in the dim light, Silas thought the symbols seemed to move like they were trying to tell him something. Just another trick of old eyes in older grief. As he turned to go, the sound came, faint at first, then more insistent. Someone pounding on his front door. Silas retrieved his shotgun from its place above the fireplace. Visitors during a Montana blizzard were rare and rarely brought good news. "Who's there?" he called, standing to the side of the door. "Help, please." The voice was weak, barely audible above the howling wind. Silas opened the door a crack, the shotgun ready. Outside, a man slumped against the porch rail, his fine coat caked with snow, his face pale beneath a well-trimmed beard. City folk by the look of him, and half frozen. "Got caught in the storm," the man gasped. "Carriage overturned a mile back." Silas hesitated only a moment before lowering his weapon and opening the door wider. "Come inside before you freeze to death." The stranger staggered in, bringing a swirl of snow and bitter cold. Silas helped him to the chair by the fire, noting the quality of his clothes. Expensive wool, fine leather boots. Not a local, certainly. "Roland Harlow," the man managed, extending a trembling hand. "I'm in your debt, sir." Silas Redwood. He didn't take the offered hand, instead turning to stoke the fire. "You're a long way from anywhere, Mr. Harlow." Harlow's eyes, sharp despite his condition, took in the cabin, the sparse furnishings, the Bible on the side table, the photograph on the mantel. "I was on my way to Helena. Business matters." The driver insisted we could outrun the storm. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Clearly, he was mistaken. Your driver. Unconscious when I left him. I followed your chimney smoke. A violent shiver ran through him. I fear he may not have survived. Silas grunted. He should go look for the man, but night had fallen and the blizzard was worsening. It would be suicide to go out now. We'll search at first light. If he found shelter, he might make it. He put a pot of coffee on the stove and fetched a blanket, which Harlow accepted gratefully. As the stranger warmed himself, Silas observed him more carefully. His hands were soft, a man who'd never worked the land. But there was something in his eyes, a calculation that reminded Silas of men he'd hunted in his former life. You're a collector, Harlow said suddenly, his gaze fixed on Margaret's painting of the wooden box. Silas stiffened. That was my wife's work. She was talented. Harlow leaned forward, studying the painted symbols. Those markings, most unusual. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, before he masked it with casual interest. I'm something of an antiquities collector myself, based in Boston. Then you're even further from home than I thought. The West has its treasures, too, Mr. Redwood. Harlow accepted the coffee Silas offered. Native artifacts primarily. The Crow tribe created some remarkable pieces. Silas said nothing, but the mention of the Crow sent a familiar ache through his chest. Margaret had spent years studying their customs, their stories. It was her life's work before. You've been out here a long time. Harlow observed his eyes now on the photograph. Family, they're gone. Silas's tone made it clear the subject was closed. Harlow nodded, seeming to understand. I apologize for the intrusion, and I'm grateful for your hospitality. Silas prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork. They ate in silence, the howling wind the only conversation. After dinner, Silas showed Harlow to the small spare room, once his and Margaret's bedroom, though he'd moved to the main room after her death, unable to sleep in their bed. I'll leave at first light to look for your driver, Silas said. Thank you. Harlow paused at the bedroom doorway. I couldn't help but notice your limp, war injury. Silas's face hardened, a reminder that justice sometimes comes too late. He closed the door before Harlow could respond. That night, Silas slept fitfully in his chair by the dying fire, the shotgun across his lap. Something about the stranger didn't sit right, though he couldn't place what. Perhaps it was just the intrusion into his solitude, the forced conversation after so many silent months. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world transformed into blinding white. Silas and Harlow set out to find the overturned carriage and driver. They discovered both a mile down the road, just as Harlow had said. The driver hadn't survived the night. They buried him in the frozen ground, a difficult task that left Silas's bad leg throbbing. Harlow insisted on saying a few words over the grave, his head bowed respectfully. If Silas didn't know better, he might have believed the man's somber expression was genuine. They returned to the cabin in silence. Harlow would need to wait until the nearest town, Bentley's Crossing, sent the weekly supply wagon, 2 days from now if the roads cleared enough. During those days, Harlow proved to be a surprisingly undemanding guest. He helped with small chores, though his soft hands were nearly useless for ranch work. Mostly he read from Silas's small collection of books or wrote in a small leather-bound journal he carried. Sometimes Silas would catch him studying Margaret's painting with unusual intensity or examining the photograph on the mantel when he thought Silas wasn't watching. On the morning the supply wagon was due, Harlow thanked Silas for his hospitality and pressed a gold coin into his palm. Far too much for 2 days' lodging and simple meals. I'm not running a hotel, Silas said, trying to return it. Harlow closed Silas's fingers over the coin. Consider it a token of my gratitude. You saved my life, Mr. Redwood. He smiled, all charm and warmth. I always repay my debts. As the supply wagon disappeared down the road with Harlow aboard, Silas couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, though he didn't understand what. He pocketed the coin and returned to his solitary existence, to the rhythm of chores and silent meals and nightly Bible readings that brought no comfort. He tried to put the stranger from his mind. By the time spring came, melting the snow and bringing new calves to his small herd, he'd nearly succeeded. 2 months later, as summer heat shimmered across the Montana plains, another carriage appeared on the horizon. This one was grander than the supply wagon. a gleaming black coach with polished brass fittings pulled by four matching bay horses. Silas watched its approach from his porch, a sense of foreboding settling over him like a storm cloud. No one came to visit Silas Redwood. No one had reason to. The carriage stopped at his gate. The driver, a hard-faced man with a shotgun beside him, remained in his seat. Instead, a young boy, no more than 12, jumped down and approached with an envelope. "Mr. Redwood," the boy asked, eyeing Silas nervously. Silas nodded. "Mr. Harlow sends his regards." The boy thrust the envelope forward and backed away quickly as if afraid Silas might bite. Inside the envelope was a letter on fine stationery, the handwriting elegant and precise. "To the man who saved my life, please accept this token of my deepest gratitude. These two women will bring warmth to your cold Montana nights. They are obedient and know their place. Consider them yours now to do with as you please. Your humble servant, Roland Harlow." Silas looked up from the letter, bewildered, then froze at what he saw. The carriage door had opened. Two women stepped down, Native American by their features, their long black hair braided with leather cords. They wore simple dresses, but what caught Silas's attention were the iron shackles on their wrists connected by a short chain. The younger one, barely out of girlhood, kept her eyes downcast, her slender shoulders trembling slightly. The older woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, stood straight, her chin raised defiantly despite her bonds. Her dark eyes met Silas's without flinching. "What in God's name?" Silas muttered. Before he could say more, the driver cracked his whip. The carriage lurched forward, wheels raising dust as it turned and headed back the way it had come, leaving the two women standing in the yard. Silas approached slowly, the letter crumpled in his fist. The older woman positioned herself slightly in front of the younger one, protective, defiant. "Do you speak English?" he asked. "Yes," the older one answered, her voice low but clear. "I am Willa. This is my sister, Aya." "You are Crow." A flicker of surprise crossed Willa's face. "Yes, how did you know?" Silas didn't answer. Instead, he gestured to their shackles. "Where's the key?" "The driver has it." Aya spoke for the first time, her voice softer than her sister's, but with the same underlying strength. Silas nodded once, then turned toward the barn. "Wait here." He returned with a chisel and hammer. The women tensed as he approached, but he kept his movements slow and deliberate. "Hold still," he instructed, positioning the chisel against the locking mechanism of Willa's shackles. A few precise strikes and the lock broke. He did the same for Aya. The women rubbed their wrists, exchanging glances of confusion. "Mr. Harlow said," Willa began. "I don't care what he said," Silas cut her off. "I'm not in the habit of keeping people in chains." He picked up the broken shackles and tossed them onto the porch. "You're not property here." He turned and headed toward the cabin, his bad leg dragging slightly as it always did when he was tired or troubled. At the door, he realized they weren't following. "Well," he called over his shoulder, "night comes fast in these parts. You'll want to be inside before then." Hesitantly, they followed him into the cabin. Silas showed them to Sarah's room, which he'd never allowed anyone to use before. Something about these women, perhaps the fear beneath their brave faces, made him break his own rule. "You'll sleep here," he said gruffly. "I'll bring water if you want to wash." He left them to settle in their soft voices, speaking in their native tongue, following him down the hall. He had no idea what he was going to do with them. Bentley's Crossing was a 2-day ride, and he couldn't leave his cattle unattended for that long. As he heated water on the stove, he tried to make sense of Harlow's gift. Who sends human beings as payment? And why would Harlow think Silas would want such a thing? He brought the water and some clean towels to the bedroom door, knocking once before entering. The women had been examining Sarah's belongings, Aya holding the silver hairbrush, Willa looking at the painting of the box. "This is beautiful," Willa said, her finger hovering over the painted symbols without touching the canvas. "My wife painted it," Silas said, setting down the water. "A long time ago." "Your wife knew our symbols," Willa observed, her tone carefully neutral. Silas stiffened. "My wife was an anthropologist. She studied your people, among others." Willa nodded, but her eyes remained thoughtful. "And now we are in her daughter's room." Silas's eyes narrowed. "How did you know that?" It was Aya who answered, setting down the hairbrush with gentle reverence. "A mother made this quilt, but a young girl slept beneath it." She touched the faded fabric. "Her spirit is still here, not unhappy, but waiting." A chill ran down Silas's spine. That's enough of that talk, he said sharply. Get cleaned up. There's food when you're ready. He closed the door firmly behind him, unsettled by Aya's words. The girl was too perceptive by half. Or perhaps she was just guessing. The room clearly belonged to a young woman, and the photograph on the mantel wasn't hard to interpret. That night, Silas prepared a simple stew, more substantial than his usual solitary meals. They ate in awkward silence, the women taking small, careful bites, as if afraid the food might be taken away. How did you come to be with Harlow? Silas finally asked. Willa and Aya exchanged glances. He came to our village, Willa replied cautiously. Said he needed guides who knew the old places. He offered good payment. Then he put you in chains and sent you here. Silas's voice was heavy with disbelief. Willa's face remained impassive. White men often change the terms of their agreements. Silas couldn't argue with that. He'd seen it happen too many times during his years as a lawman. Well, there's no agreement here, he said. You're free to go, though I'd advise waiting until I can take you to town. There are men in these parts who wouldn't hesitate to harm two women traveling alone. We have nowhere to go, Aya said softly. Our village is far to the north. Silas sighed. He was too old for complications like this. You can stay until we figure something out. I could use help with the ranch. Can't pay much, but you'll have food and shelter. Why would you help us? Willa asked, suspicion evident in her voice. Silas rose from the table, his knee protesting. Because it's the decent thing to do. He began clearing the dishes. And because I've seen enough cruelty in this world to last several lifetimes. Later, after the women had retired to Sarah's room, Silas sat in his rocking chair, Bible unopened in his lap. For the first time in years, his evening ritual felt hollow, a motion without meaning like so much of his life. He glanced at the photograph of Margaret and Sarah, their smiles frozen in time. What would Margaret think of this situation? She'd always had more faith in humanity than he did, even after everything they'd seen. What am I supposed to do with them, Maggie? He whispered to the empty room. As always, there was no answer, just the creaking of his chair and the distant howl of a lone wolf somewhere in the hills. Washita. The days that followed settled into an uneasy routine. Willa proved to be skilled with horses, her small, strong hands capable of tasks that Silas's arthritis made difficult. Aya took to cooking and gardening, reviving Margaret's long-neglected herb plot behind the cabin. Silas kept his distance, speaking only when necessary, retreating to the barn or the fields whenever conversation threatened to become personal. Yet he found himself watching them, Willa's fierce concentration as she mended a saddle, Aya's gentle way with the chickens, and the half-wild barn cat that had appeared last winter. They reminded him of what his home had once been, a place of life and purpose, not just existence. A week after their arrival, Silas was awakened in the night by a sound he couldn't immediately identify. He reached for his revolver, always kept loaded beside his bed, and rose silently. The noise came from his storage room, a soft scraping like someone moving cautiously in the dark. He made his way down the hall, gun raised, pushing the door open with his foot. Willa stood frozen by his old trunk, a lantern casting long shadows across her face. Her hand was buried in a pile of his belongings, old papers, books, the remnants of his former life as a lawman. Looking for something. Silas's voice was deadly quiet. Willa straightened slowly, her expression guarded rather than guilty. Yes. The honest answer surprised him. He'd expected denial's excuses. What? He demanded, keeping the gun steady. Willa hesitated, then made a decision. A box, wooden with carvings like those in your wife's painting. Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. Why bottom? Because if I don't find it, my brother will die. The stark declaration hung in the air between them. Silas studied her face, looking for deception. He found only determination and fear. Real fear not for herself, but for someone she loved. Sit down, he said, gesturing with the gun toward a wooden chair in the corner. And explain. Now. Willa sat her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Harlow is not what he seems. He holds my brother captive at a silver mine near Calico Ridge. He sent us to find a box he believes is hidden on your land. Why would he think that? A dying merchant gave it to you 12 years ago, she said. During a snowstorm, the merchant stole it from our people, and Harlow has been searching for it ever since. Silas's blood ran cold. The merchant, Ezekiel Foster, had indeed appeared on his doorstep during a blizzard 12 years past, badly wounded and fleeing from pursuers. Before he died, he'd entrusted Silas with a carved wooden box, making him promise to keep it safe until his son came looking for it. Silas had buried the box beneath the barn floor and never spoken of it to anyone. How does Harlow know about this? I don't know, Willa admitted. He knows many things he shouldn't. The door creaked and Aya appeared, her eyes wide with concern. Willa, I heard voices. She stopped at the sight of the gun. Your sister was just explaining why you're really here, Silas said coldly. Seems you left out some details at dinner. Aya entered the room, fully moving to stand beside her sister. We had no choice. Nathan, our brother, he's all we have left. And why does Harlow want this box so badly? He believes it contains a map to treasure, Willa said. Gold hidden by the merchant. Silas shook his head. Then Harlow's a fool. There's no treasure map. Then what is in the box? Aya asked. Silas finally lowered the gun. I don't know. I never opened it. The sisters exchanged surprised glances. You've had it all this time and never looked inside? Willa's disbelief was evident. I made a promise to a dying man. Silas returned the revolver to its holster. His last words were that his son would come for it someday. It wasn't mine to open. A silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Aya spoke. What will you do with us now? It was a fair question. They had been lying to him, searching his home while he slept. By rights, he should march them to town at first light and be done with the whole business. Yet something in their story rang true. The fear for their brother wasn't feigned, and Harlow had struck him as a man capable of using others for his own ends. Nothing tonight, he decided. Get some sleep. We'll talk more in the morning. After they left, Silas remained in the storage room, looking at the scattered contents of his trunk. Papers from his days as a lawman wanted posters, letters from territorial governors thanking him for services rendered. Remnants of a life that seemed to belong to someone else now. Among them was the deed to this land, signed by him and Margaret 28 years ago. They'd been so full of hope, then planning a family, a legacy. Instead, all he had was dust, memories, and now two desperate young women with their own troubles. He returned to his bedroom but didn't sleep. Instead, he sat by the window watching as dawn slowly reclaimed the land from darkness. By the time the first rays of sun touched the distant mountains, he'd made his decision. At breakfast, he laid out his terms. I'll help you get your brother back, he told the sisters, but we do it my way. No more lies. Relief flooded Willa's face, though she tried to hide it. Why would you help us? Silas looked toward the photograph on the mantel. Because I know what it's like to lose family, and because Harlow used my hospitality to further his own schemes. I don't take kindly to that. What is your way? Aya asked. First, we need to understand what we're dealing with. Silas poured more coffee. Tell me everything about Harlow, your brother, and why this box matters so much. Aya glanced at Willa, who nodded slightly. Our brother Nathan Two Rivers is 20 years old, Aya began. He is not just our brother. He is the grandson of Chief Thundercloud, the last spiritual leader of our clan. Harlow came to our lands last winter, Willa continued. He said he was researching native artifacts for a museum in Boston. He gained our trust, learned our stories, our sacred places. Then 2 months ago, he took Nathan to show him something at Calico Ridge. When they didn't return, we went looking. We found Nathan being held at an old silver mine. Harlow said he would kill him unless we brought him the box from your ranch. He gave us until the full moon to find it, Aya added quietly. 3 weeks from now. Silas absorbed this, his weathered face giving nothing away. And why does your brother's bloodline matter in this? The sisters exchanged another look, this one weighted with secrets. Our grandfather was keeper of ancient knowledge, Willa said carefully. Traditions passed down through generations. Nathan is his heir. You're not telling me everything, Silas observed. No, Willa agreed. Some things are not ours to share with outsiders. Silas nodded, respecting their reticence, even as it frustrated him. Fair enough, but if I'm to help you, I need to know what I'm facing. How many men does Harlow have? What weapons? 5 men that we saw, Willa replied. All armed. The mine has only one entrance, guarded at all times. And Nathan, is he hurt? They beat him. Aya's voice trembled slightly. But he was alive when we left. Silas rose from the table, his decision made. First, we need to see what's in that box. It's time I broke my promise to a dead man. He led them to the barn, dismissing their offers of help as he pried up the loose floorboards in the corner stall. Beneath was a small hollow in the dirt lined with oilcloth. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in wax canvas. Silas lifted it carefully, brushing away the dirt. It was heavier than he remembered. "That's it," Willa whispered, her eyes fixed on the bundle. "Those are our symbols on the wrapping." Silas carried the bundle to the workbench and carefully unwound the canvas. Inside was a box about the size of a small Bible, carved from dark wood that had been polished by generations of hands. The symbols matched those in Margaret's painting exactly. Flowing lines and angular shapes that seemed to tell a story Silas couldn't read. "Do you know what these mean?" he asked. Aya reached out hesitantly, her fingers hovering over the carvings without touching them. "They tell the story of the stone sun, a sacred relic of our people. It was lost many generations ago." Silas examined the box's simple iron latch. No lock, just a clever mechanism that required pressure in the right places. With a soft click, it opened. Inside, nestled in faded red cloth, lay three items: a leather-bound journal yellowed with age, a folded piece of what appeared to be deerskin with markings on it, and a sealed envelope addressed simply, "To my son." Silas lifted out the journal first. The name Ezekiel Foster was inscribed on the inside cover, along with the date, 1862. He flipped through the pages, scanning the neat handwriting. "It's Foster's diary," he murmured. "Seems he was a missionary before becoming a merchant." He read a few passages aloud. "March 15th, 1862. Witnessed a sacred ceremony of the Crow people today. They allowed me to observe from a distance, a rare honor for an outsider. They revere a stone they call the sun that fell from heaven, a reddish crystal said to have healing properties. The elders claim it has been in their possession since before the white man came to these lands. April 3rd, 1862. The Hollister brothers have offered $500 for information about native artifacts. Their interest seems particularly focused on healing stones or crystals. I have not mentioned the sunstone, though the temptation is great. Such funds would allow me to expand my mission work considerably." Silas looked up sharply. "Hollister." Willa leaned forward. "What does it say?" Silas continued. Reading, skipping ahead several months, October 17th, 1862. May. "God forgive me for what I have done. I took the stone sun during the night ceremony. The payment from the Hollisters was delivered as promised, but I cannot bear the weight of this sin. 3 children in the village have fallen ill since the stone's disappearance. The elders say its protection has been removed." December 2nd, 1862. "I could not give the stone to the Hollisters. Something in Samuel Hollister's eyes frightened me, a coldness, a hunger that seemed unholy. I told them I failed to acquire it. They did not believe me. I fear they will come looking." The entries continued, documenting Foster's flight across the territories, always one step ahead of the pursuing Hollisters. The final entry was dated nearly 12 years ago. January 18th, 1873. "The wound festers. I will not survive another day. If you read this, Silas Redwood, know that you have shown a dying sinner more kindness than he deserves. The map will lead to the stone sun. It must be returned to the Crow people. My son, William, will come for this box someday. Give it to him and him alone. He will know what to do." Silas set down the journal and unfolded the deerskin map. It showed a series of landmarks, mountains, rivers, and what appeared to be a cave marked with the same symbols as the box. "This is Chimney Rock Valley," he said, recognizing the distinctive formation drawn on the map. "About a day's ride from here." "The stone sun," Aya whispered, her eyes wide. "It's real. Grandfather spoke of it, but I thought it was just a legend." Willa's expression was guarded. "If Harlow knows what's in this box, then he's not after gold. He wants the stone sun." Why, Silas asked. "What's so special about this stone?" Aya and Willa exchanged glances again, that same weighted look. "The legends say it fell from the sky during the time of our ancestors," Aya explained. "It glows with inner fire and can heal the sick and wounded, but only in the hands of those chosen to wield it, the descendants of those who first found it. Like your brother," Silas concluded, "grandson of the last spiritual leader." Willa nodded. "If Harlow believes the legends, that would explain why he needs Nathan. The stone won't work for just anyone. Silas considered this. He'd seen enough in his long life to know that some legends held kernels of truth. And even if the stone's powers were mere superstition, Harlow clearly believed in them strongly enough to kidnap a young man and send two women to do his dirty work. "There's something else we need to consider," he said slowly. "Foster's journal mentions the Hollister brothers, Samuel and Randall. I knew a Samuel Hollister once. He crossed to his trunk and dug through it until he found what he was looking for, an old dog-eared photograph. He laid it on the workbench beside the box. The photograph showed a group of men standing in front of a small frontier church. A younger Silas stood among them alongside a tall man with a neat beard and cold eyes. This was taken in Bentley's Crossing 25 years ago," Silas explained. "That's Samuel Hollister beside me. We weren't friends, but we served on the town council together before I moved out here with Margaret." Willa studied the photograph, then looked up at Silas, her eyes narrowing. "He looks like Harlow." "Yes," Silas agreed grimly. "Because Roland Harlow is Randall Hollister. He must be. And if he's anything like his brother, we're in more trouble than I thought." A heavy silence fell over the barn. The morning sun streamed through the cracks in the walls, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like spirits. Finally, Aya spoke, her voice soft but certain. "The stone sun must be returned to our people. It's the only way to end this." Silas nodded slowly. "First we get your brother back. Then we deal with the stone." He closed the box carefully. "Hollister doesn't know we've found it. That gives us an advantage." "What's your plan?" Willa asked. Silas's weathered face hardened with resolve. "We set a trap, and this time I'll be ready for him." As they walked back to the cabin, Aya paused at the small fenced area behind the house. The graves of Margaret and Sarah marked with simple wooden crosses. She knelt beside them, her lips moving in a silent prayer or blessing. Silas watched from a distance, an unexpected lump forming in his throat. In 23 years, no one but him had ever tended those graves or said a prayer over them. "She sees things others don't," Willa said quietly, coming to stand beside him. "The spirits speak to her." "There's no such thing as spirits," Silas replied, but the words lacked conviction. "Yet you keep your wife and daughter's room exactly as they left it," Willa observed. "You speak to their photograph when you think no one is listening." Silas didn't answer. He couldn't. "We all have our ghosts, Mr. Redwood," Willa said. "The only difference is whether we admit they're there." She walked away to join her tester, leaving Silas with the uncomfortable feeling that these two young women might understand him better than he understood himself. That night, for the first time in years, Silas dreamed of Margaret. Not as she was at the end, bloody and still in his arms, but as she had been in life, laughing, her dark hair flying in the wind as she rode across the meadow beyond the cabin. In the dream, she turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a sadness that pierced his heart. "They're coming, Silas," she said. "They've always been coming." He woke with tears on his face and a certainty in his heart. The past wasn't done with him yet. Perhaps it never would be. The box sat on his bedside table, its carvings seeming to shift in the pre-dawn light. Inside was a map to a stone that probably held no magic at all. Just another legend born of fear and hope, and the human need to believe in something greater than ourselves. Yet people had died for it. More might die still, including a young crowman whose only crime was his bloodline. Silas rose and dressed in the darkness, strapping on his old gun belt for the first time in years. The leather was stiff, the weight unfamiliar after so long. But his hands remembered just as they remembered how to track, how to hunt, how to bring justice to those who thought themselves beyond its reach. By the time the sisters emerged from Sarah's room, he had coffee brewing and a plan forming. The legendary lawman might be old, his leg might pain him on cold mornings, but Silas Redwood wasn't dead yet, and Randall Hollister was about to learn exactly what that meant. End of part 1, 6,000 words. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor strokes of pink and gold as Silas stepped onto the porch, his worn boots making the weathered boards creak beneath his weight. The air held that peculiar Montana stillness, the moment when night creatures had retired and day creatures had not yet stirred. In his hands he held his old Winchester, repeating rifle, the woodstock polished by years of use. His fingers moved automatically, checking the action, ensuring it was clean and functioning. Some skills a man never forgot, no matter how long they lay dormant. Behind him, the cabin door opened. Willa emerged, her dark eyes taking in the rifle and the determined set of Silas's jaw. "You were a hunter," she said, "not a question." "Of men mostly," Silas replied, not looking up from his task. "In another life." And now he finally met her gaze. "Now I'm just an old man with ghosts." She crossed her arms, studying him with that penetrating stare that seemed to strip away his defenses. "Old perhaps, but I think those ghosts have kept you strong." Silas didn't answer. He wasn't used to being read so easily, especially by someone half his age. Instead, he asked, "Your sister still sleeping?" "Aya rises with the sun. She's behind the cabin gathering herbs for a protection ritual." Silas grunted. "We'll need more than herbs where we're going." "You'd be surprised what the right herbs can do." Willa said, a hint of challenge in her voice. "Our ways have kept us alive for generations, just as your guns have kept you alive." "No disrespect intended," Silas said, softening slightly. "I've seen enough in my years to know there are forces at work in this world I don't understand. But Hollister and his men won't be impressed by rituals." "The rituals aren't for them." Willa looked toward the rising sun. "They're for us, to clear the mind, strengthen the heart." A comfortable silence fell between them. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily above the pine forest that marked the eastern boundary of Silas's property. "We'll need supplies," Silas finally said. "Food, ammunition, medical supplies. I'll make a list." "I can hunt," Willa offered, "and Aya knows which plants heal wounds." "Good. We leave at first light tomorrow. It's a day's ride to Chimney Rock Valley, where we'll study the land before approaching the mine." He handed her the rifle. "Show me how well you shoot. We can't afford mistakes." Willa took the Winchester, handling it with unexpected familiarity. "My father taught me before the sickness took him, 5 winters ago." Silas nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her loss. "There are targets set up behind the corral, empty tin cans on the fence posts. Let's see what you can do." By midday, Silas had to admit he was impressed. Willa handled the rifle like she'd been born to it, hitting 8 out of 10 targets at varying distances. Aya proved skilled with a knife, her slender arm delivering the blade with deadly accuracy into a wooden post Silas had designated as a target. They were survivors, these two. Not just the pampered gifts Hollister had presented them as, but women who had endured hardship and emerged stronger for it. As they prepared the cabin for their absence, securing windows, preserving what food couldn't travel with them, Silas found himself watching them work with a grudging respect. They moved efficiently, without wasted motion or unnecessary chatter. After lunch, Silas disappeared into the barn, returning with a wooden case he hadn't opened in years. Inside, nestled in velvet, gone threadbare with age, lay his twin Colt revolvers, the weapons that had made him legendary in 3 territories. He cleaned them meticulously, the familiar motions bringing back memories of another life. He had been young then, full of righteous fire, believing that justice and the law were the same thing. Life had taught him otherwise in the hardest way possible. As the afternoon waned, Silas found Aya kneeling by Margaret and Sarah's graves again. This time she had placed small bundles of herbs and wildflowers on each. "What are those?" he asked, approaching slowly to avoid startling her. "Sage for cleansing, lavender for peace, arrow for protection," she replied without looking up, "and wildflowers because every spirit enjoys beauty." Silas wanted to dismiss her rituals as superstition, but something in her quiet certainty gave him pause. "Do you really believe they're here somehow?" Aya finally looked up at him, her young face solemn. "They never left Mr. Redwood. The love between you was too strong to be broken even by death." A lump formed in Silas's throat. He swallowed hard. "If that's true, then they've witnessed 23 years of a broken man going through the motions of living." "No," Aya said gently. "They've watched over a man who endured when many would have surrendered. That takes a different kind of courage." She rose gracefully and touched his weathered hand briefly with her small one. "Your wife wants you to know it wasn't your fault. She made her choice that night." Silas stiffened. "How could you possibly know what happened that night?" "I don't," Ida admitted, "but she shows me images, feelings. She was protecting something. Something besides your daughter." "The box," Silas breathed, realization dawning. Margaret knew about the box. Aya nodded. The painted symbols, she knew what they meant. Silas's mind raced. Margaret had been an anthropologist specializing in Native American cultures. Her particular focus had been the spiritual practices of the northern tribes, including the Crow. Had she encountered the stone sun in her research? Had she known its significance? When did she paint that picture? Aya asked. A month before she died. Silas replied, the memory surfacing with painful clarity. She was agitated for weeks, working late into the night. When I asked what was troubling her, she said she was racing against time, that some things were meant to stay buried. She knew they were coming for it, Aya said softly. But how? Silas shook his head, the pieces not quite fitting together. The journal said Foster stole the stone in 1862. Margaret died in 1862. The timing doesn't make sense. Unless she was the one who told that Foster where to find it in the first place. Willa's voice came from behind them. She had approached silently, a handful of herbs clutched in her fist. Or unless there's more to the story than Foster wrote in his journal. The three of them stood in silence by the graves, the evening breeze rustling the grass around the simple wooden crosses. The questions hung in the air between them, unanswered but pressing. Finally, Silas spoke. Whatever the truth is, Hollister believes the stone is real and powerful. That makes him dangerous. He looked at each sister in turn. We need to focus on getting your brother out alive. The rest can wait. As they walked back to the cabin, the setting sun cast long shadows across the land. Silas felt a strange sense of purpose taking root within him, something he hadn't experienced since his days as a lawman. For 23 years, he had existed rather than lived, going through the motions of survival without any real reason to continue. Now suddenly he had one. These young women needed him. Their brother needed him. And perhaps in some way he couldn't quite articulate, Margaret and Sarah needed him to finish what had begun so long ago. That night, Silas removed the photograph from the mantel and studied it in the lamplight. Margaret's intelligent eyes seemed to look directly at him across the years. What were you hiding, Maggie? He whispered. What did you know? The next morning they set out before dawn, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten. Silas rode his old buckskin gelding, steady and reliable, despite his advanced years, much like Silas himself. Willa and Aya shared the bay mare Silas kept for hauling supplies. The wooden box was secured in Silas's saddlebag, wrapped in the same waxed canvases that had protected it for over a decade beneath the barn floor. He had debated whether to bring it or leave it hidden, finally deciding that keeping it close was safer than risking Hollister sending more men to search his property in their absence. They rode in silence as the sun rose, each lost in their own thoughts. The trail led them westward, skirting the foothills of the Rockies through meadows where wildflowers nodded in the summer breeze. As they stopped to rest the horses at midday, Silas spread Foster's map on a flat rock. The landmarks were clear enough: Chimney Rock with its distinctive spire, the river that curved around its base, and the network of old mining tunnels that honeycombed the surrounding hills. The stone sun is hidden here, he said, pointing to a cave marked with the same symbols that adorn the box, northeast of the main mine entrance, higher up the ridge. And Nathan is being held here, Willa asked, indicating the largest mine shaft. According to what you've told me, Gillis confirmed, we'll approach from the east using this ridgeline for cover. There's an old hunter's cabin about 2 miles from the mine where we can establish a base. From there, we can observe their movements, determine their routines. How long will that take? Aya asked, concern evident in her voice. A day, maybe 2, Silas replied. I know you're worried about your brother, but rushing in without proper intelligence would be suicide. Willa nodded her agreement. Nathan would want us to be smart about this. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the terrain growing more rugged as they approached the mountains. Silas led them on a less traveled path, avoiding the main trail where they might be spotted by Hollister's men or other travelers. As they rode, Aya moved her mare alongside Silas's gelding. You know this land well, she observed. I should, Silas replied. I've lived here half my life. But that's not why you know these hidden trails, is it? Silas gave her a sidelong glance. You ask a lot of questions for someone so young. Age isn't always the best measure of wisdom, she replied with a small smile. My grandfather said that. Despite himself, Silas felt a grudging smile tug at the corners of his mouth. Fair enough. No. I know these trails because I used to track men through these mountains. Outlaws mostly. Men who thought they could hide from the law. But not from you. Not from me. Silas agreed. Not back then. What changed? Aya asked. Silas's expression darkened. Everything. He urged his horse ahead, ending the conversation. Some wounds were still too raw to probe even after all these years. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising a summer storm. They pushed on, hoping to reach the hunter's cabin before the rain began. The first fat droplets were just beginning to fall when the small log structure came into view, nestled in a grove of pines at the base of a rocky outcrop. It was simple but solid, a single room with a stone fireplace and shuttered windows. "It hasn't been used in years," Silas said as they dismounted and led the horses to a lean-to at the side of the cabin. "But it should keep us dry." Inside the cabin was dusty but intact. A rough wooden table, two chairs, and a narrow cot were the only furniture. Silas built a fire while the sisters unpacked their supplies. As the storm intensified outside, thunder rolling across the mountains, they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. The firelight cast long shadows on the walls, giving their faces a golden glow against the gathering darkness. "Tell us about the Hollisters," Willa said as they finished eating. "What kind of men are they?" Silas stared into the flames, his mind traveling back through the years. Samuel was the older brother, charming when he wanted to be, but cold underneath. He came to Bentley's Crossing in '61, bought the mercantile, made himself indispensable to the town. By the time I became sheriff in '62, he was on the town council, respected by everyone. "And Randall?" Aya asked. "Randall was younger, quieter, lived in his brother's shadow. I didn't pay him much mind back then." Silas's face hardened. "That was my mistake." "What happened?" Willa leaned forward, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. Silas was silent for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. "These young women were risking their lives to save their brother. They deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as he understood himself. In the summer of '62, we had a string of robberies along the stage route," he began. "Systematic, professional. Nobody hurt but significant losses. I was investigating, getting close to identifying the gang responsible." He rose from his chair and moved to the small window, watching the rain lash against the glass. "Then one night, while I was out of town following a lead, they came to my house. 5 men in masks. They weren't just thieves, they were killers." His voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the windowsill. "Margaret and Sarah were alone. By the time I got back, the house was burning. I found them." He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm sorry," Aya said softly. Silas acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "I killed 4 of them that night. The 5th escaped with a knife wound across his back, my doing. I tracked him as far as the ridge above Chimney Rock Valley before a blizzard wiped out the trail." "And you think that was Randall Hollister?" Willa asked. "I know it was," Silas replied grimly. "Samuel disappeared from town around the same time. I spent years searching for them, but it was like they'd vanished into thin air." He turned back to face them. "Until Randall Hollister showed up at my door during a blizzard, calling himself Roland Harlow." "But why would they attack your family?" Aya's brow furrowed in confusion. "If they were after the Stone Son, how would they know Margaret had any connection to it?" "That's what doesn't make sense," Silas admitted. "Margaret never mentioned the stone to me, and according to Foster's journal, he stole it earlier that same year. The timing doesn't add up." Thunder crashed outside, as if emphasizing the mystery. The sisters exchanged one of their meaningful glances. "There's something we haven't told you," Willa said slowly, "about our grandfather, Chief Thundercloud." Silas returned to his chair, sensing this was important. "I'm listening." "He wasn't just a spiritual leader, Willa continued. "He was the last keeper of the old knowledge, histories, and sacred traditions dating back before white men came to our lands. The Stone Son was his greatest responsibility," Aya added. "It had been passed down through generations of leaders, its power used only in times of great need." "What kind of power?" Silas asked, his skepticism evident. "Healing mostly," Willa replied. "The stone can cure illnesses that would otherwise be fatal, but only when used by someone of the Keeper's bloodline, someone like Nathan. Our grandfather said the stone came from the stars long before our people walked these lands," Aya continued. "It glows with its own inner light and grows warm to the touch when held by one of the chosen bloodline." Silas remained silent, processing this information. He'd seen strange things in his time, phenomena he couldn't explain by any natural law, but a magical healing stone that stretched credibility. Still, Hollister clearly believed in it strongly enough to kidnap a young man and go to elaborate lengths to recover it. Either the stone had some basis in reality, or Hollister was even more deranged than Silas had thought. "There's more," Willa said, her voice dropping. "Our grandfather and your wife knew each other." Silas's head snapped up. "What?" "Margaret Redfeather," Aya said. "That's what our people called her. She came to our village many times when I was very young, learning our ways, our stories. Grandfather trusted her like no other outsider." "That's impossible," Silas protested. "Margaret would have told me." "Would she?" Willa challenged. "If she was sworn to secrecy, if she was protecting something greater than herself." Silas rose abruptly and paced the small cabin, his bad leg dragging slightly. Margaret had often traveled for her research, sometimes for weeks at a time. He had never questioned her about the details of her work, respecting her independence. Could she have been involved with the Crow tribe in ways she never revealed to him? "If what you're saying is true," he said finally, "then Margaret knew the stone was real. She knew its importance to your people." "More than that," Eyal said quietly. "Grandfather made her a keeper of knowledge as well, the first outsider ever given that honor. She was entrusted with certain secrets, certain responsibilities, like protecting the stone if something happened to your grandfather." Silas concluded the pieces beginning to fall into place. "But why would she keep this from me? We didn't have secrets from each other." "Or did they?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable now. Margaret had taken her secrets to the grave. "Perhaps she was trying to protect you," Aya suggested gently. "The fewer people who knew, the safer everyone would be." Silas wasn't convinced, but he had no alternative explanation. The revelation that his wife had led a double life trusted by the Crow tribe with their most sacred knowledge was difficult to reconcile with the woman he thought he'd known so well. "We should get some rest," he said finally, unwilling to pursue the conversation further. "Tomorrow we scout the mine." The sisters didn't press him. They prepared their bedrolls near the fire while Silas took the narrow cot. As the storm continued to rage outside, Silas lay awake staring at the rough-hewn ceiling. Margaret Redfeather. The name echoed in his mind, strange yet somehow fitting. His wife had always had a deep respect for the native cultures she studied, often speaking of the wisdom and spiritual depth she found in their traditions. Had that respect evolved into something more profound, a commitment, a responsibility that ultimately led to her death? The thought that Margaret might have died protecting not just their daughter, but a sacred trust made her loss no less painful. But it cast her final moments in a different light. She hadn't been just a victim, she had been a guardian until the end. Silas closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years, he prayed not the empty ritual of his nightly Bible reading, but a genuine plea for guidance. If Margaret had deemed this stone worth dying for, then he owed it to her memory to see this through, whatever the cost. Dawn brought clear skies and renewed purpose. They ate a quick breakfast and set out on foot, leaving the horses secured at the cabin. Silas led them along a game trail that wound up the eastern slope of the ridge, overlooking Chimney Rock Valley. The air was clean and sharp after the storm, the world washed fresh. Under different circumstances, Silas might have appreciated the beauty of the pine forests and rocky outcroppings, the distant peaks still capped with snow, despite the summer heat. But today his focus was on the abandoned silver mine that lay on the western face of the ridge. They moved carefully, staying under the cover of trees, aware that Hollister might have men patrolling the area. By mid-morning, they had reached a vantage point that offered a clear view of the mine entrance below. Silas used a small brass spyglass to study the operation. "Two men guarding the entrance," he reported quietly, "armed with rifles. There's a cook fire going, so there are more inside. I count 3 horses in the corral." "Is Nathan there?" Willa asked anxiously. Silas continued his surveillance. "No sign of him. He's likely being kept inside the mine." He adjusted the spyglass. "There's Hollister." A well-dressed man had emerged from the mine shaft, speaking to one of the guards. Even at this distance, his authoritative bearing was evident. "He looks impatient," Silas observed. "Probably wondering why you two haven't returned with the box yet." "The full moon is in 2 weeks," Ea reminded them. "That's when he said he would hurt Nathan if we failed." Silas collapsed the spyglass and turned to the sisters. "We need to find the cave where Foster hid the stone. According to the map, it should be northeast of here, higher up the ridge." They continued their careful ascent following the ridgeline. The terrain grew steeper, the forest giving way to rocky outcroppings and narrow ledges. Silas's bad leg made the climb difficult, but he pushed through the pain, unwilling to show weakness. By early afternoon, they had reached the approximate location marked on Foster's map. The problem was there were several small caves and crevices in the area, any of which could be the hiding place. Look for the symbols, Silas instructed. Foster would have marked the correct cave somehow. They spread out examining the rock faces. It was Aya who found it a small opening, partly concealed by a fallen pine, with the now familiar symbols carved faintly into the stone beside the entrance. Here, she called softly. Silas and Willa joined her. The cave mouth was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to pass through. Silas lit a small lantern he'd brought and led the way inside, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. The passage widened slightly after a few yards, opening into a small chamber. Their lantern light revealed crude symbols painted on the walls similar to those on the box, but more extensive, telling a story Silas couldn't read. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, of sorts, a flat rock supported by smaller stones. And on top of it, nestled in a depression in the stone, lay a small leather pouch. "Is that it?" Willa whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Silas approached cautiously. Only one way to find out. He picked up the pouch, feeling something solid inside. Carefully, he loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into his palm. A stone the size of a hen's egg tumbled out, catching the lantern light. It was a deep, translucent red, like a drop of blood captured in crystal. Even in the dim light, it seemed to possess an inner glow. The surface shot through with veins of gold. The stone sun. Aya breathed, her eyes wide with awe. Silas turned it in his hand, feeling its unexpected weight. It was warm to the touch, though, whether from some inner property or simply from being held, he couldn't tell. "It doesn't look like much," he said, though in truth there was something compelling about the stone, something that drew the eye and held it. "May I?" Aya held out her hand. Silas placed the stone in her palm. The moment it touched her skin, the glow intensified slightly, the red deepening to a rich crimson. "It knows," she whispered. "It recognizes the blood of the keepers." Silas was about to dismiss this as superstition when he noticed something odd. The chronic ache in his bad leg, a constant companion for 23 years, had diminished while he held the stone. Now that he no longer touched it, the familiar pain was returning. Coincidence, surely, or the power of suggestion. "We should go," Willa said, glancing nervously toward the cave entrance. "We've been away from our lookout too long." Aya reluctantly returned the stone to its pouch, which Silas secured inside his shirt. They extinguished the lantern and made their way back outside, blinking in the bright afternoon sunlight. The journey back down the ridge was tense, all three of them aware that they now carried exactly what Hollister wanted, what men had killed for. The forest seemed full of potential dangers, every snapping twig a possible enemy. They had almost reached their original vantage point when Aya suddenly froze, raising her hand in warning. A moment later, Silas heard it too, voices approaching from below. He gestured for the sisters to take cover behind a large boulder while he crouched behind a fallen tree, drawing his revolver. The voices grew clearer, two men talking casually as they climbed the trail. "Waste of time," one was saying. "Those Indian girls probably ran off with the box." "Boss says they'll be back," the second voice replied. "Says they care too much about their brother to abandon him." "Well, I say we should just kill the boy and be done with it. Been babysitting him for weeks now." "Boss would skin you alive. He needs the boy to make the stone work." The men came into view, rough-looking characters with the hard eyes of hired guns. They carried rifles slung over their shoulders, walking with the confidence of men who feared no danger in these woods. Silas remained perfectly still, barely breathing. If the men continued on their current path, they would pass within feet of his hiding place. A confrontation now would alert Hollister that something was wrong. But luck wasn't with them. One of the men stopped suddenly, sniffing the air. "You smell that?" The second man paused, looking around. "Smell what?" "Smoke, like a campfire." Silas silently cursed. The wind must have shifted, carrying the scent of their breakfast fire from the cabin. "Probably just some hunter," the second man said dismissively. "Maybe, or maybe our Indian girls found help." The first man unslung his rifle. "Let's check it out." They started moving again, now more alert, scanning the forest around them. They were heading directly toward the boulder where Willa and Aya were hidden. Silas had a split-second decision to make. If the men discovered the sisters, a firefight was inevitable. The noise would bring the rest of Hollister's men, but if he acted first, he might be able to neutralize the threat silently. He holstered his revolver and drew the hunting knife from his belt. Then, with a speed that belied his age and infirmity, he moved. The first man never knew what hit him. Silas's arm locked around his throat from behind the knife, finding its mark with deadly precision. The man's struggles lasted only seconds before he went limp. The second man turned at the sound, raising his rifle, but too late. Willa had emerged from behind the boulder, her own knife flashing in the dappled sunlight. The blade buried itself in the man's chest. His finger tightened reflexively on the rifle's trigger, but Aya had anticipated this, throwing herself forward to push the barrel upward. The shot cracked through the forest, but the bullet went harmlessly into the canopy, startling a flock of birds into flight. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen, the bodies of the two men at their feet, the echo of the gunshot fading among the trees. "We need to move," Silas said urgently. "That shot will bring the others." They dragged the bodies into a dense thicket, covering them with fallen branches and pine needles. It wouldn't hide them for long, but it might buy some time. "Back to the cabin," Silas ordered. "We grab our supplies and go." They moved as quickly as caution allowed, aware that Hollister's men would be searching the area. The gunshot had changed everything. Their advantage of surprise was gone. When they reached the cabin, they gathered their belongings with swift efficiency. Silas paused only long enough to study Foster's map one more time, committing the details to memory before folding it carefully and returning it to the box. "What's the plan now?" Willa asked as they saddled the horses. "We still need to get your brother out," Silas replied. "But now Hollister will be on high alert. We need a new approach." "What if we offered a trade?" Aya suggested. "The stone for Nathan." Silas shook his head. "Hollister wouldn't honor such a deal. He'd take the stone and kill all of us." "Then what?" Willa's frustration was evident. "We can't fight our way in." Silas secured the last of their supplies to his saddle, his mind racing through options. "Maybe we don't have to fight." A plan was forming in his mind, risky but possibly their only chance. "Maybe we let Hollister think he's winning." He outlined his idea as they mounted up and rode away from the cabin, heading south to circle around to the western side of the valley. It was a desperate gambit, relying as much on psychology as on tactical advantage. But Silas knew Randall Hollister, or at least he knew the type of man Hollister had become. Men like that had predictable weaknesses: pride, arrogance, a need to gloat over their enemies. By nightfall, they had established a new camp in a secluded ravine on the far side of Chimney Rock. From here, they could approach the mine from an unexpected direction. More importantly, they were positioned between the mine and the nearest town, Calico Ridge, where Hollister would presumably return once he had what he wanted. As they sat around a small, carefully shielded fire, Silas removed the stone from its pouch once more. In the firelight, it seemed to pulse with its own inner rhythm, the red depths shifting like a living thing. "I still don't understand why this is so important to Hollister," he said. "Even if it does have healing properties, why go to such lengths? Why involve your brother?" Willa and Aya exchanged one of their meaningful glances. "There's a part of the legend we haven't told you," Willa said slowly. "The Stone Sun doesn't just heal ordinary ailments. According to our oldest stories, it can reverse even death itself if used by one of the chosen bloodline before the spirit has fully departed. Bring back the dead." Silas couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "Not exactly," Aya clarified. "But someone on the threshold, someone whose body still breathes but whose spirit has begun the journey. Yes, the stone can call them back, but only one of our bloodline can wield that power." Silas was silent, considering the implications. If Hollister believed this legend, if he had someone on the verge of death he desperately wanted to save. "Samuel," he said suddenly, "his brother." "What?" Willa leaned forward. "I always assumed Samuel Hollister died that night at my ranch," Silas explained. "I shot him in the chest at close range. No one could survive that. Or so I thought." The pieces were falling into place now. But what if he didn't die? What if Randall got him away, kept him alive somehow? 23 years is a long time to linger between life and death, but if Randall had resources, access to doctors. "A body can be kept alive," Aya agreed, "even when the spirit has partly departed. I've seen it, people who breathe but never wake year after year. And now Randall has found a way to bring his brother back completely," Silas concluded. "Or so he believes." The implications were chilling. If Samuel Hollister returned the man who had ordered the attack on Silas's family, who had pursued the Stone Son with such ruthless determination, what vengeance might he seek? "We need to destroy the stone," Silas said firmly. "No." Both sisters spoke in unison, identical expressions of horror on their faces. "The Stone Son is sacred to our people," Willa protested. "It's been passed down through countless generations." "It's also dangerous," Silas countered. "Too dangerous to exist if men like the Hollisters know about it." "It's not yours to destroy," Aya said quietly but firmly. "It belongs to our people, to our bloodline. Only the Keeper can decide its fate." "Your brother," Silas remembered. "Yes, Nathan is the rightful heir to the Keeper's role. The decision must be his." Silas wasn't satisfied with this answer, but he recognized the futility of arguing. These women would never allow him to destroy something so central to their cultural heritage. And perhaps they were right. Who was he to decide the fate of an artifact that had been revered for generations? His own wife had apparently deemed it worthy of protection, worthy even of her life. "Fine," he conceded. "We focus on rescuing Nathan. But if things go wrong, if it comes down to the stone, or your lives, I'm choosing your lives." "Understood." The sisters nodded reluctantly. Silas returned the stone to its pouch and secured it inside his shirt again. As he did so, he couldn't help noticing that the pain in his leg had once more diminished while he handled the stone. Twice could still be coincidence, but doubt was beginning to creep into his skepticism. What if the legends were true? What if this small piece of red crystal really did possess the power to heal, even to restore life from the brink of death? And if so, what might it do in the hands of a man like Randall Hollister, driven by decades of obsession and grief? The questions haunted Silas as he took the first watch, staring into the darkness beyond their small fire. Tomorrow they would put his plan into action, a plan with too many variables, too many opportunities for failure. But it was the only chance they had to save Nathan Two Rivers and prevent the Stone Son from falling into the hands of a man who would use it to unleash a nightmare from Silas's past. In the distance, Chimney Rock stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, a jagged finger pointing accusingly toward heaven. Below it, somewhere in the darkness, Randall Hollister waited as he had been waiting for 23 years. The circle was closing. Tomorrow would bring an end one way or another. As Silas gazed at the stars, he felt Margaret's presence more strongly than he had in years. Not a ghost, not a supernatural visitation, but the essence of her that he carried within himself, her wisdom, her courage, her unwavering moral compass. "I'll finish what you started, Maggie," he whispered to the night. "I promise." The wind sighed through the pines, almost like a response. In the morning, they would ride into a confrontation 2 decades in the making. Silas didn't know if he would survive it, but for the first time in 23 years, that possibility didn't fill him with indifference. He had found a reason to live. Now he just needed to survive long enough to see it through. Morning came with a thick mist that blanketed the valley, turning the familiar landscape into something ghostly and uncertain. Silas took it as a good omen. The fog would provide additional cover for their approach. They broke camp at first light, leaving no trace of their presence. The plan was simple in concept, though fraught with risk in execution. Willa would approach the mine openly, claiming to have found the box and demanding to see her brother. Meanwhile, Silas and Aya would circle around to a secondary entrance Silas had spotted during their surveillance, a ventilation shaft that seemed large enough for a person to pass through. While Hollister was distracted by Willa's appearance, they would enter the mine, locate Nathan, and get him out. Then Silas would confront Hollister, a confrontation he had been waiting for since the night his family was taken from him. As they prepared to separate, Silas handed the stone pouch to Willa. "Keep this with you. Hollister will want proof you've found what he's looking for." "What if he takes it?" Willa asked. "He won't, not immediately," Silas assured her. "Men like Hollister want to savor their victories. He'll want to gloat to explain his cleverness. That's when we'll make our move." Willa tucked the pouch inside her dress. "And if something goes wrong, then improvise." Silas placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're smart and resourceful. Trust your instincts." They parted ways at the edge of the forest, Willa heading directly toward the mine entrance, while Silas and Aya began their circuitous approach to the ventilation shaft. The mist worked in their favor, reducing visibility and muffling sounds. Silas moved with a stealth that belied his age and infirmity, years of tracking experience, evident in every careful step. Aya followed close behind, her own movements nearly silent. They reached the ventilation shaft without incident, a dark opening in the hillside partially concealed by scrub brush. Silas examined it carefully, testing the surrounding rock for stability. "It's narrow but passable," he whispered. "I'll go first. Wait for my signal before following." Aya nodded, her young face set with determination. Silas removed his hat and gun belt, handing them to her, then lowered himself into the opening. It was a tight squeeze, the rough stone scraping against his shoulders, but manageable. He descended slowly, feeling for handholds in the dark shaft. After about 15 feet, his boots touched solid ground. He was in a tunnel dimly lit by distant lanterns. The air was stale but breathable, heavy with the scent of damp earth and old timber. He whistled softly, 3 short notes, a signal they had agreed upon. Moments later, Aya's slender form appeared above him, descending with the agility of youth. He helped her down the last few feet, then retrieved his gun belt and hat. "This way," he whispered, pointing toward the source of the light. They moved cautiously through the tunnel, alert for any sound that might indicate the presence of Hollister's men. The old mine was a labyrinth of passages, some shored up with timber supports, others seeming on the verge of collapse. As they neared a junction where their tunnel met a larger one, voices became audible. Men talking, the words indistinct, but the tone casual. Guards probably passing the time with idle conversation. Silas held up a hand, signaling Aya to stop. He peered carefully around the corner. 2 men sat on crates at the intersection of several tunnels, rifles leaning against the wall beside them. Between them, a lantern cast a warm yellow glow. He pulled back and signaled to Aya, 2 men armed. She nodded her understanding. Silas drew his revolver, checking that it was fully loaded. The direct approach was risky, but they had no time for subtlety. Willa would be reaching the mine entrance soon, and they needed to find Nathan before Hollister realized they were attempting a rescue. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Then with a nod to Aya, he stepped around the corner, revolver raised. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of his lawman days. "Hands where I can see them." The guards froze, then slowly raised their hands. Their eyes darted between Silas and Aya, who had appeared beside him, knife in hand. "Who the hell are you?" one of the men demanded. "Someone you don't want to anger," Silas replied coldly. "Where's the crow boy?" The men exchanged glances but remained silent. "I won't ask again," Silas warned, cocking the revolver. "Third tunnel on the left," the younger guard finally said, ignoring his companion's glare. "But there's no way out for him, or for you." "We'll see about that," Silas said. "Now on the ground, face down, hands behind your backs." Once the men were subdued, Aya bound their wrists with leather cords she carried for that purpose. Silas gagged them with strips torn from one man's bandana, then dragged them into a side tunnel where they wouldn't be immediately visible. "That won't hold them for long," he told Aya. "We need to move quickly." They hurried down the passage. The guard had indicated the lantern light growing dimmer behind them. This section of the mine seemed older, less used. The air was mustier, the tunnel narrower. They almost missed the crude cell, a small chamber off the main tunnel, its entrance blocked by iron bars set into the rock. If not for the faint sound of breathing from within, they might have passed it by. Aya rushed forward. "Nathan," she called softly. A figure stirred in the darkness behind the bars. A young man moved into the faint light, tall and lean, his face bruised, but his eyes alert and defiant. His hands were bound in front of him, but he managed to grasp the bars. "Aya?" His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. "How did you—" "No time," Silas interrupted. "Stand back from the door." The lock was simple but solid. Silas examined it briefly, then pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket, the tools of his former trade carried out of habit all these years. Within moments, the lock clicked open. Nathan stepped out, embracing his sister briefly. Despite his obvious weakness, there was a dignity in his bearing that impressed Silas. "Willa?" Nathan asked anxiously. "Creating a diversion," Aya explained as she cut his bonds. "She's at the main entrance now." "We need to go," Silas urged, already turning back toward the junction. "Hollister will figure out what's happening soon enough." But as they reached the intersection where they had left the guards, they found the tunnel blocked. Randall Hollister stood there, flanked by 3 armed men. The guards they had subdued were nowhere to be seen. "Mr. Redwood," Hollister said pleasantly, as if greeting an old friend. "Or should I say Sheriff Redwood? I must admit I didn't recognize you when we met at your cabin." The years haven't been kind. Silas's hand moved toward his revolver, but Hollister shook his head. I wouldn't, he advised. My men are rather quick on the trigger. Silas let his hand fall back to his side. His mind raced, calculating odds, looking for an opening. But there was none. They were trapped. Where's Willa? Aya demanded. Hollister smiled thinly. Your sister is quite safe. She's been most helpful, in fact, delivering exactly what I've been seeking for so many years. If you've hurt her, Nathan began stepping forward despite his weakness. She's unharmed, Hollister assured him. For now, he turned his attention back to Silas. I must say I'm impressed by your resilience, Sheriff. Most men your age would have succumbed to bitterness and despair long ago. Some of us have a reason to keep going, Silas replied evenly. Justice has a long memory. Ah, justice. Hollister's smile widened. Such a fluid concept, don't you think one man's justice is another man's vengeance? Where is my sister? Nathan demanded again. Hollister gestured casually. In the main chamber where the real business of this day will take place. His eyes cold and calculating, fixed on Silas. I think it's time you all joined her, dear. There's someone who's been waiting a very long time to see you again, Sheriff. A chill ran down Silas's spine. There was only one person Hollister could mean. Samuel. So it was true. The elder Hollister brother had survived that night, lingering in some twilight state between life and death for 23 years, sustained by his brother's obsession and the hope offered by the stone sun. As Hollister's men moved forward to take their weapons, Silas felt an odd sense of fatalism settle over him. Perhaps this was always how it was meant to end, face to face with the man who had ordered the death of his family in the very valley where he had lost the trail so many years ago. The circle was indeed closing, and whatever happened next would be the final chapter in a story that had begun on a blood-soaked night 23 years ago. A story of lost vengeance and a stone that glowed with the light of a fallen sun. End of part 2, 6,000 words. The main chamber of the mine was vast cathedral-like in its dimensions. Timber supports rose like ancient pillars to the rocky ceiling 20 feet above. Lanterns hung from hooks driven into the wood, casting overlapping pools of amber light that did little to dispel the shadows gathering in the corners. Silas walked with measured steps, flanked by Hollister's men, his hands bound before him. Beside him, Nathan and Aya moved with the same quiet dignity. There was no point in resistance, not yet. They were outnumbered, outgunned. Survival now depended on patience, on watching for the right moment. At the far end of the chamber, a makeshift altar had been constructed, a flat stone slab raised on wooden blocks. Beside it stood Willa, her face a careful mask that revealed nothing, though her eyes found her brother's immediately relief flashing briefly across her features. But it was what lay upon the altar that drew Silas's attention and held it. A man, or what remained of one, reclined on the stone surface. He was thin to the point of emaciation, his skin like yellowed parchment stretched over the sharp angles of his skeleton. His chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Most of his body was covered by a fine wool blanket, but his arms lay exposed at his sides, withered to little more than bone and sinew. His face was barely recognizable as human sunken cheeks, hollow eye sockets, lips pulled back from teeth in a permanent rictus grin. Only the eyes showed any sign of life, pale blue and unnaturally bright, burning with an intensity that seemed to consume what little remained of his physical form. Samuel. Silas breathed recognition and disbelief mingling in his voice. Those burning eyes turned toward him, focusing with terrible clarity. The lipless mouth attempted a smile. Sheriff Samuel Hollister rasped his voice a dry whisper like dead leaves blown across stone. How kind of you to join us. 23 years had passed since Silas had faced this man across the barrel of a gun. 23 years since he'd put a bullet through Samuel Hollister's chest and watched him fall. By all rights, Samuel should have died that night. No man could survive such a wound, especially in those days so far from proper medical care. Yet here he was, clinging to life by the thinnest of threads, sustained by what must have been extraordinary measures in his brother's fanatical devotion. Impressive, isn't it? Randall Hollister moved to stand beside the altar, laying a gentle hand on his brother's shoulder. The strength of will that has kept him here waiting for this moment. This isn't life, Silas said, unable to keep the horror from his voice. It's torture. You should have let him go years ago. Let him go, Randall's face contorted with sudden rage. After what you did to him, after you hunted us like animals, after he murdered my family, Silas corrected his own anger rising to meet Hollister's. After he ordered men to burn my home with my wife and daughter inside. They were never supposed to die, Randall shouted, then seemed to catch himself regaining his composure with visible effort. That wasn't the plan. We only wanted the stone. Then why attack my home at all? Silas demanded. Why not just go after Foster? A rasping sound came from the figure on the altar, a laugh or an attempt at one. Because your wife had already taken it from him. Samuel wheezed. Silas's world tilted on its axis. What? Margaret Redfeather, Randall said, savoring the name, watching Silas's reaction. That's what the crow called her, wasn't it? The white woman who became keeper of their secrets. He moved around the altar, circling Silas like a predator. Foster stole the stone from the crow, yes. But before he could deliver it to us, your wife intercepted him. She took the stone and gave Foster a counterfeit to bring to us. You're lying, Silas said automatically, though a cold certainty was settling in his gut. This explained too much Margaret's secrecy, her agitation in the weeks before her death, the painting of the box. Am I? Randall's smile was cruel. Foster eventually confessed after Samuel caught up with him. By then it was too late. Margaret had hidden the stone somewhere. Even Foster didn't know. So we had to go directly to the source. You sent men to torture the information out of my wife. Silas said, the full horror of that night suddenly clear to him. It hadn't been a simple robbery gone wrong. It had been a targeted attack, an interrogation that had turned deadly. They were instructed to be persuasive, not lethal, Randall said dismissively. Your wife proved uncooperative, and your unexpected return complicated matters. She died protecting the stone, Ayah said softly. She kept her oath to our people. Yes, very noble, Randall sneered, and very costly, not just for her, but for Samuel. He gestured to his brother's wasted form. Your bullet nearly killed him, Sheriff. Would have if not for my intervention. Do you know what it's like to keep someone alive who hovers constantly at death's door? The doctors, the medicines, the constant vigilance. You should have let me die, Samuel whispered, his terrible gaze still fixed on Silas. But my brother, always the believer, convinced me to hold on. For this day, for retribution. And now here we are. Randall spread his arms theatrically. All the players assembled for the final act. The stone returned to us, and at last. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the familiar leather pouch, holding it up triumphantly. Your wife died for nothing, Sheriff. The stone is ours, and Samuel will live again. Silas glanced at Willa, whose face remained carefully neutral. Had she given Hollister the real stone, or was this part of some plan she'd devised on her own? Even if the legends are true, Silas said, playing for time, the stone only works for those of the Keeper's bloodline. You need Nathan for that. Precisely. Randall nodded, pleased that Silas understood. Which is why young Mr. Two Rivers has been our guest these past weeks. Once Samuel is restored, he'll have no further use for the boy, of course. But until then, he left the threat unspoken. Nathan stood straighter, his bruised face set with quiet defiance. I will never use the stone for you. Won't you? Randall nodded to one of his men, who immediately pressed a knife to Aya's throat. Your sister's life means nothing to me. Refuse and I'll have Bartlett here open her throat. Don't do it, Nathan, Aya said calmly, though her eyes betrayed her fear. The stone isn't meant for them. Silas watched the siblings, impressed by their courage. These young people were willing to die for their principles, for the sacred trust passed down through their family, just as Margaret had been. A new respect for his wife bloomed in Silas's heart. She had kept secrets from him, yes, but for a purpose greater than either of them. She had been entrusted with something precious, something worth protecting with her life. And now, through some twist of fate or divine intervention, that same trust had fallen to him. Wait, Silas said, an idea forming. Before anyone dies, there's something you should know, Hollister. Randall raised an eyebrow. And what might that be? The stone you have there, it's not the real one. A flash of uncertainty crossed Randall's face. You're bluffing. Am I? Silas kept his voice steady, confident. Check for yourself. The real stone sun glows with its own inner light, It's warm to the touch, even in the coldest air. Randall hesitated, then opened the pouch, tipping its contents into his palm. The stone that fell out was red and crystalline, similar to the one they had found in the cave. But it didn't glow. It caught the lantern light and reflected it, nothing more. "What trick is this?" Randall demanded, rounding on Willa. "You brought me a fake." "I brought what was in the box," Willa replied evenly. "Perhaps you don't understand the legends as well as you think." Randall's face darkened with rage. "Where is the real stone?" "I have it," Silas said, drawing all eyes to him. "I've had it all along." This was a gamble, but Silas was counting on Hollister's desperation, his obsession with saving his brother. Men in the grip of such emotions made mistakes. Where Randall approached his hand straying to the pistol at his hip. "Tell me, or I'll put a bullet through your good leg and watch you crawl." "It's hidden," Silas replied calmly. "Somewhere you'll never find it without my help. Kill me, and Samuel dies too." For a tense moment, Randall seemed on the verge of violence. Then with visible effort, he mastered himself. "What do you want, Redwood?" "Your freedom, safe passage for these savages." "I want justice," Silas said simply. "For my family, for what you did 23 years ago." A dry chuckle came from the altar. Samuel's withered hand rose a few inches, then fell back weakly. "Always the righteous lawman," he wheezed. "Even now." "Let the boy use the stone on his own terms," Silas continued. "No coercion, no threats. If he chooses to help your brother, so be it. If not, you'll have to accept that some sins can't be undone." Randall laughed incredulously. "You expect me to leave my brother's fate in the hands of a crowboy who hates us? Do you take me for a fool?" "I'd take you for a man who's run out of options," Silas countered. "The real stone is hidden. Torture me all you want, I'll die before I tell you. But give Nathan the freedom to choose, and you might still save Samuel." Randall's eyes narrowed as he considered this. "And why would the boy choose to help us?" "Because unlike you, he understands mercy," Silas said, "and because it's the price of his sister's freedom." Nathan stepped forward. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "If you release my sisters and Silas unharmed, I'll use the stone on your brother." "Nathan, no," Aya protested. "It's my decision," Nathan said firmly. "As keeper of the stone, it's my right to decide who receives its blessing." Randall studied the young man thoughtfully. "And I'm supposed to trust that once your sisters are safely away, you'll honor this bargain." "My word is sacred," Nathan replied with quiet dignity. "Unlike yours." The barb hit home. Randall's jaw tightened, but he didn't lash out. Instead, he turned to Samuel, leaning close to speak in his ear. The brothers conferred briefly, Samuel's rasping whisper, too faint for others to hear. Finally, Randall straightened. "Very well. We accept your terms with one condition. Redwood stays until the ritual is complete. Insurance, you might say." Nathan glanced at Silas, who gave a slight nod. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than their current situation. "Agreed," Nathan said. "Now release my sisters." "The stone first," Randall insisted. "The real one." Silas hesitated, then nodded to Aya. "Show him." With reluctance, Aya reached into the folds of her dress and withdrew a small object wrapped in buckskin. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing the true stone sun, its red depths pulsing with a subtle glow that seemed to intensify as it neared Nathan. Randall's eyes widened with naked avarice. "At last," he breathed. "After all these years." He reached for the stone, but Aya pulled it back. "Nathan is its keeper now," she said firmly. "Only he may handle it until the ritual is complete." Randall looked like he might argue, but a feeble gesture from Samuel stayed him. "Very well," he said tightly. "Bartlett Myers escort the women out. Make sure they leave the valley. And if anyone tries anything heroic—" He left the threat unspoken. The men cut Willa and Aya's bonds. Aya handed the stone to Nathan, her eyes conveying a silent message. Then she and Willa were led away, casting worried glances back at their brother and Silas. When they had gone, Randall turned to Nathan. "Now, boy, save my brother." Nathan held the stone in his palm, studying its glowing depths. "The ritual requires preparation," he said. "Water from a pure source, sage to cleanse the air, prayers to guide the spirit back to its vessel." "We have water," Randall gestured to a canteen hanging from a hook on one of the support beams. "As for the rest, do what you must, but be quick about it. Samuel has waited long enough." Nathan nodded and set about preparing for the ritual with methodical care. He requested a small bowl for the water, which Randall provided impatiently. He asked for his hands to be freed so he could work more effectively. After a moment's hesitation, Randall agreed, though he kept his pistol trained on the young man. Silas remained still watching, waiting. His own hands were still bound, and the remaining guards stood close behind him, alert for any sudden movement. But Silas had faced worse odds in his time, and he had one advantage: these men didn't know about the hunting knife concealed in his boot, which Hollister's men had missed during their cursory search. All he needed was an opportunity, and if there was one thing his long life had taught him, it was that opportunity always came to those patient enough to wait for it. Nathan worked with quiet efficiency, arranging items on a small table beside the altar. He crushed herbs between his fingers, releasing their pungent aroma into the stale mine air. He poured water into the bowl and held the stone above it, whispering words in the crow language. As he worked, the stone's glow intensified, casting a reddish light over the proceedings. Even Silas, with all his skepticism, had to admit there was something uncanny about the crystal. It pulsed like a living heart, the crimson light ebbing and flowing in rhythm with Nathan's chanting. Samuel watched with those terrible burning eyes, hope and fear mingling in his gaunt face. Randall paced impatiently, dividing his attention between the ritual and the tunnel entrance where his men had taken Willa and Aya. "How much longer?" he demanded after what seemed an interminable time. "Rushing the spirits is unwise," Nathan replied calmly, "but we are nearly ready." He approached the altar, holding the stone in his right hand, the bowl of water in his left. "Samuel Hollister," he intoned formally, "your spirit has lingered between worlds for many seasons. Today you must choose to return fully to this life or to continue your journey to the next." "I choose life," Samuel whispered, his withered hand reaching weakly for the stone. "Give me back what was taken from me." Nathan held the stone just out of reach. The stone sun's power is not given lightly. It demands truth in exchange for life. He fixed Samuel with a penetrating gaze. "Did you order the death of Margaret Redfeather and her daughter?" Samuel's eyes darted to his brother, then back to Nathan. "I ordered, information extracted. Their deaths were not intended." "Yet you did not mourn them," Nathan pressed. "You did not seek to make amends for the innocent blood spilled in your quest." "Enough of this," Randall interrupted. "You're here to heal, not to judge. Do it now or I'll put a bullet in Redwood's head." Nathan ignored him, keeping his focus on Samuel. "The stone requires atonement before healing. Acknowledge your sins, Samuel Hollister. Only then can the stone's light penetrate the darkness in your soul." Samuel's breathing grew more labored, his sunken chest heaving with the effort. For a moment it seemed he might refuse. Then unexpectedly, tears gathered in those burning eyes. "I am sorry," he wheezed. "For the woman, for the child, I never meant such harm." Nathan nodded solemnly. "The stone hears your confession." He dipped the stone sun into the bowl of water, which immediately began to glow with the same reddish light. Then he lifted the dripping stone and held it above Samuel's heart. "Drink," he instructed, bringing the bowl to Samuel's lips. With Randall's help, Samuel managed a few sips of the glowing water. His whole body shuddered, and a sound escaped him, half gasp, half sob. Nathan placed the stone directly on Samuel's chest, where it seemed to sink slightly into the flesh, the glow spreading outward like water soaking into parched earth. "Now we wait," Nathan said, stepping back from the altar. "The stone will either accept or reject him." The chamber fell silent, save for the hissing of the lanterns and Samuel's labored breathing. The red glow continued to spread, following the pathways of veins and arteries beneath the papery skin, illuminating Samuel Hollister from within like a macabre lantern. Silas watched with a mixture of fascination and dread. Despite his lifelong skepticism, he couldn't deny what his eyes were showing him. The stone possessed some power beyond his understanding, whether divine or merely unexplained by science he couldn't say. Randall had moved to his brother's side, his expression a complex mixture of hope, fear, and desperate longing. In that moment, Silas could almost pity him. For all his cruelty and obsession, Randall Hollister had spent 23 years keeping his brother tethered to life, driven by love as much as by guilt. It was that realization that made what happened next even more tragic. Samuel's body suddenly arched, rising off the altar as if pulled by invisible strings. His mouth opened in a silent scream, the red glow now pouring from his eyes. his nostrils, his gaping mouth. The stone on his chest pulsed faster, brighter, until it was painful to look at directly. "What's happening?" Randall demanded, reaching for his brother, but pulling back from the heat now emanating from the glowing body. "What have you done?" "I've done nothing," Nathan replied calmly. "The stone judges, not I. It seems your brother's atonement came too late, or was not sincere enough." No, Randall's anguish was palpable. Samuel fight it. But Samuel Hollister could no longer hear his brother's pleas. His body convulsed once more, then collapsed back onto the altar. The red glow began to fade, retreating back toward the stone on his chest. As it did, it seemed to pull something with it, a luminous essence that rose from Samuel's body like steam from hot springs. "His spirit," Nathan murmured. "The stone is releasing it to continue its journey." Randall lunged forward, reaching for the stone, but Nathan blocked his way. "Don't interfere," he warned. "The consequences could be dire for both of you." "You did this deliberately." Randall accused his grief, turning swiftly to rage. "You turned the stone against him." "The stone cannot be turned," Nathan replied firmly. "It responds to truth, to balance. Your brother's sins were too great, his atonement too little too late." As they argued, Silas saw his opportunity. The guard behind him had moved forward, drawn by the spectacle on the altar. In that moment of distraction, Silas dropped to one knee, reaching for the knife in his boot. His fingers closed around the handle, just as Randall, blind with fury, drew his pistol and aimed it at Nathan. "You'll pay for this," he snarled. "You and your entire savage tribe." Silas moved without conscious thought, years of training taking over. The knife left his hand in a fluid arc, burying itself in Randall Hollister's shoulder, his gun arm. The pistol discharged, the bullet going wide, striking one of the support beams with a solid thunk. Randall howled in pain, the pistol dropping from his suddenly nerveless fingers. He staggered backward, clutching his wounded shoulder, his face a mask of shock and rage. The guard turned, reaching for his own weapon, but Nathan was faster. He grabbed the bowl of glowing water and flung it into the man's face. The guard screamed, clawing at his eyes as the liquid burned like acid. In the chaos that followed, Silas managed to maneuver his bound hands in front of him, retrieving Randall's dropped pistol. He fired a single shot at the guard, who collapsed in a heap. Randall, meanwhile, had backed against the far wall, yanking the knife from his shoulder with a grunt of pain. Blood soaked his fine coat, but his eyes burned with the same fanatical light that had animated his brother's. "It's over, Hollister," Silas said, keeping the pistol trained on him. "Your brother is gone. The stone has made its judgment." "Nothing is over," Randall spat. "You think this is the end? I've waited 23 years for vengeance. I can wait longer if necessary." On the altar, Samuel's body had grown still, the red glow entirely faded. The stone sun rested on his chest, inert, now its inner fire banked. Nathan carefully retrieved it, wrapping it once more in buckskin. "Your brother's spirit is free now," he told Randall. "That's more mercy than he deserved after what he did." "You know nothing of what he deserved," Randall snarled. "Samuel was a visionary. He saw the power in your tribal superstitions when others laughed. He understood what the stone could do in the right hands. And look where that understanding led him," Silas observed, "to 23 years of half-life and a death that settled nothing." Something in Randall's eyes shifted, then a calculation, a decision made. His hand moved to his vest pocket, withdrawing something small and metallic. "Perhaps you're right, Sheriff," he said, his tone suddenly eerily calm. "Perhaps it's time this all ended." Before Silas could react, Randall flicked open the small object, a silver lighter, and tossed it toward the nearest support beam. The dry, aged wood, soaked in decades of oil from mining operations, caught immediately. Flames licked upward with frightening speed. "What have you done?" Nathan cried. Randall's laugh held no humor, only the hollow sound of a man with nothing left to lose. "If my brother can't live, then we'll all die together. Poetic, don't you think?" The fire was spreading rapidly, jumping from one timber to the next. The air filled with acrid smoke. Somewhere deeper in the mine, something exploded with a dull whoomp. Coal dust or blasting powder, Silas couldn't tell. "We need to get out," he shouted to Nathan over the growing roar of the flames. "Now do it, yeah." Nathan nodded, tucking the stone securely inside his shirt. He moved to Silas's side, taking the knife from Randall's hand and cutting Silas's bonds. Randall made no move to stop them or to save himself. He remained against the wall, watching the flames climb higher, with an expression of terrible satisfaction. Go if you want, he told them. It won't matter. These old mines are like tinder boxes. The whole complex will be engulfed within minutes. The exits will be blocked. Silas knew he was right. Already the heat was becoming unbearable, the smoke making it difficult to breathe. But he'd faced death too many times to surrender to it now. This way, he ordered Nathan, pointing toward a side tunnel that seemed less affected by the flames so far. Stay low where the air is clearer. They left Randall Hollister standing beside his brother's body, a silhouette against the growing inferno, his lifelong obsession burning away with the timbers of the old mine. The next minutes were a nightmare of smoke, heat, and confusion. The mine's layout was complex, and many tunnels had already become impassable, blocked by fallen debris or walls of flame. Silas led the way, relying on his memory of the mine's structure from his earlier exploration, but it was like navigating a labyrinth that changed with every turn. Nathan stayed close behind him, one hand on Silas's shoulder, to maintain contact in the thickening smoke. Neither spoke. They needed to conserve breath in the increasingly toxic air. Twice they were forced to backtrack when tunnels proved impassable. Once they narrowly avoided being crushed by a collapsing support beam. All the while the fire spread, consuming the dry timber and ancient coal dust with voracious appetite. Silas's lungs burned, his eyes streamed from the smoke. His bad leg threatened to buckle with each step. But he pushed on, driven by the knowledge that Willa and Aya waited outside, that Margaret and Sarah's deaths would mean nothing if he gave up now. After what seemed an eternity, but was probably only minutes, they reached a junction. Silas recognized the one where they had subdued the guards earlier. From here, he knew the way to the ventilation shaft they had used to enter. Almost there, he gasped to Nathan, whose face was streaked with soot, his eyes red-rimmed from the smoke. But when they reached the shaft, they found their escape route blocked. The fire had caused a partial collapse, and rubble now filled the bottom of the shaft, making climbing impossible. The main entrance, Nathan suggested, his voice hoarse. It's our only chance. Silas nodded grimly. The main entrance meant retracing their steps through some of the worst of the fire, but they had no choice. It was that, or suffocate in the increasingly smoke-filled tunnels. They turned back, moving as quickly as their burning lungs and exhausted bodies would allow. The heat was intense now, the air shimmering above the flames that licked at the walls and ceiling. Silas's clothes were soaked with sweat, his throat raw from the smoke. They were halfway to the main chamber when the tunnel ahead collapsed in a shower of sparks and burning debris. The way forward was blocked. No, Nathan pounded his fist against the wall in frustration. There has to be another way. Silas leaned against the wall, fighting for breath. His vision was starting to blur at the edges, a bad sign. The smoke was getting to him. Soon they would both lose consciousness, and then his hand braced against the rock wall, felt a faint current of air, cooler, fresher than the superheated atmosphere around them. He traced the sensation to a narrow fissure in the rock, barely visible in the flickering light of the flames. Here, he croaked, pointing. Feel that? There's airflow. Nathan placed his hand near the crack, his eyes widening slightly. A way out. Maybe. Silas examined the fissure more closely. It was narrow, too narrow for a man to pass through. But the rock around it looked unstable, possibly weakened by the heat and the mine's shifting structure as supports burned away. Help me with this. Together they attacked the fissure, using Silas's knife in their bare hands to pry loose chunks of rock and coal. The work was exhausting in the terrible heat, and every breath brought more smoke into their lungs. But gradually the opening widened. After several minutes of desperate effort, they had created a hole large enough for a man to squeeze through. Beyond, they could see not daylight, but a darker space, another tunnel perhaps, or a natural cave system adjacent to the mine. You first, Silas wheezed, gesturing for Nathan to go through. Nathan hesitated. What about you? Your leg. I'll manage, Silas assured him, though in truth he wasn't certain. The opening was small, and his old injury made contorting his body difficult. Go. Your sisters need you. After a moment's more hesitation, Nathan nodded and began squeezing through the opening. It was a tight fit, but he was young and lean. With some effort, he made it through, then turned back to help Silas. Come on, he urged, reaching back through the hole. The air is better on this side. Silas began maneuvering himself into the opening, grimacing as his bad leg protested the awkward position. The heat at his back was intense now, the fire having reached this section of tunnel. He could feel his clothes beginning to smolder. With a final desperate push, aided by Nathan's strong grip on his arms, Silas squeezed through the opening and collapsed into the cooler ground beyond. For a moment, he simply lay there gulping the relatively fresh air into his burning lungs. "We made it," Nathan said, his voice thick with relief. "But where are we?" Silas forced himself to sit up and take stock of their surroundings. They were in a natural cave, dimly lit by the glow of the fire visible through the hole they had just traversed. The air was cooler here with a distinct mineral tang. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. Old limestone caves, Silas realized. They run all through these hills. Miners sometimes broke into them by accident. He pointed toward the darker recesses of the cave. There should be a way out if we follow the air current. They moved carefully through the darkness, using the wall for guidance. The cave system was a maze, but they kept to the path where they could feel the faint movement of air against their faces. Gradually, the air grew fresher, the darkness less absolute. After what seemed hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, they saw a faint glow ahead that could only be daylight. They quickened their pace, stumbling over uneven ground in their haste to reach it. The cave mouth was small but navigable, partly concealed by brush and young pines. They emerged into the late afternoon sunlight, blinking like owls, their faces streaked with soot, their clothes singed and torn. They stood on a hillside some distance from the mine entrance. From this vantage, they could see smoke pouring from the main shaft and several ventilation holes black against the clear blue sky. The entire mine complex was burning from within like a volcano about to erupt. "Willa and Aya," Nathan said urgently. "We need to find them." Silas nodded, though every muscle in his body cried out for rest. Hollister's men were supposed to escort them out of the valley. Let's hope they did so before returning to the mine. They made their way down the hillside, moving as quickly as their exhausted condition allowed. The terrain was rough, but the need to find the sisters drove them forward despite their injuries and fatigue. They had just reached the valley floor when they heard voices calling their names. Looking up, they saw Willa and Aya riding toward them, leading two additional horses, Silas's buckskin, and a bay that must have belonged to one of Hollister's men. The reunion was emotional, the sisters dismounting to embrace their brother with tears of relief. Silas stood apart, giving them their moment, his own heart lighter than it had been in years at the sight of their joy. "We thought you were dead," Willa said when she finally released Nathan. "When the mine started burning." "Hollister's final act of vengeance," Nathan explained. "He set the fire himself when the stone rejected his brother." "Rejected?" Aya looked confused. "How?" "It's a long story," Nathan said wearily. "One best told when we're far from here." "What about Hollister's men?" Silas asked. "The ones who escorted you out?" A shadow crossed Willa's face. "They won't be troubling anyone again. They made the mistake of thinking two Indian girls would be easy prey once they were away from the mine." Silas nodded understanding. These sisters were survivors warriors in their own right. He'd seen enough of their skills to know they would have been more than a match for Hollister's thugs, especially when fighting for their freedom. "We should go," he said, glancing back at the burning mine. "That fire could attract attention from Calico Ridge. Best if we're not here to answer questions." They mounted up Nathan, sharing Willa's horse, and rode away from Chimney Rock Valley as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. None of them looked back at the column of smoke rising from the mine, the funeral pyre of the Hollister brothers, and their decades-long obsession. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow some miles from the valley beside a clear stream where they could wash away the grime of the mine. The night was warm, the sky ablaze with stars. They built a small fire and shared the provisions Willa and Aya had managed to secure. As they ate, Nathan recounted what had happened in the mine, the confrontation with Hollister Samuel's deathbed confession, and the stone's judgment. Silas listened without comment, still processing the day's events and revelations. When Nathan finished his tale, a contemplative silence fell over the group. It was Aya who finally broke it. "The stone is returned to its rightful keeper," she said softly, "and Margaret Redfeather's trust is fulfilled. Her spirit can rest now." Silas looked up at the mention of his wife's name. "I still don't understand why she kept it all from me. We shared everything, or so I thought." "She was protecting you," Aya said with quiet certainty. "She knew what men like the Hollisters would do for the stone. By keeping you ignorant, she ensured you couldn't betray its location under duress." "And she was protecting Sarah," Willa added. "A child cannot keep such secrets. It was safer for both of you not to know. Silas considered this. It made sense in a painful way. Margaret had carried the burden alone to shield those she loved most. Had she known the Hollisters would come that night? Had she somehow anticipated her own death? Questions without answers. Yet somehow the knowledge that Margaret had died for something she believed in, something worth protecting, eased the ache of her loss in a way nothing else had in 23 years. "What will you do now?" he asked the siblings. "Return to your people." Nathan nodded, his hand unconsciously moving to the place inside his shirt where the stone rested. "I must take up my grandfather's duties as keeper. The stone belongs with our tribe as it has for generations." "And you too," Silas looked at the sisters. "I'll go with Nathan," Willa said. "Our people need to know what happened, how close we came to losing the stone forever." Aya, however, seemed less certain. She met Silas's gaze with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Your ranch will need tending," she said, "and Sarah's garden has just begun to flourish again." Silas understood what she was offering. Not just help with the ranch, but companionship, a reason to truly live again, rather than merely exist. After so long alone, the prospect was both appealing and terrifying. "It's a hard life," he warned. "Lonely, not much for a young woman with your whole future ahead of you." Aya smiled gently. "I go where the spirits guide me, Mr. Redwood, and they have led me to your door for a reason." Later, as the others slept, Silas sat by the dying fire gazing at the stars. For the first time in decades, he felt at peace. The weight of unfinished business of justice denied had lifted from his shoulders. Margaret and Sarah were avenged. The Hollisters were gone. The stone was returned to its rightful guardians. And somehow, in the process of closing this dark chapter of his past, Silas had found a future he hadn't dared to imagine. He thought of Aya's offer to return with him to the ranch. It wouldn't be a romantic arrangement. She was young enough to be his granddaughter, and his heart would always belong to Margaret. But companionship, someone to share meals with, to tend the land alongside him, that was something he hadn't realized how deeply he missed until it was offered. And perhaps with time, the ranch could become something more than a place of grief and solitude. Perhaps it could be a home again. "What do you think, Maggie?" he whispered to the stars. "Would you approve?" The night breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby cottonwoods, carrying the scent of pine and wild sage. It wasn't an answer exactly, but Silas chose to take it as one nonetheless. They parted ways 3 days later at a fork in the trail where the eastern path led toward the Crowlands and the western path back toward Silas's ranch. The goodbye was brief but heartfelt. Nathan and Willa eager to return the stone to their people, yet grateful for Silas's help in their time of need. "Our people will remember what you did for us," Nathan said, clasping Silas's hand firmly. "You'll always be welcome among the Crow." Willa, less demonstrative but no less sincere, simply nodded. "Thank you for helping us save our brother, and for finishing what your wife began." Aya embraced each of her siblings, tears streaming down her face. "I'll visit when the winter ends," she promised. "Tell grandfather I'm fulfilling the vision he had for me to follow in Margaret Redfeather's footsteps, to be a bridge between worlds." As Nathan and Willa rode eastward, Silas and Aya watched until they disappeared from view. Then they turned their horses westward toward home. The journey back was peaceful, the summer days warm and bright, the nights cool and star-filled. They traveled at an easy pace, Silas pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his days as a lawman. Aya listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering insights into her people's history and beliefs. By the time they crested the final ridge and saw the ranch spread out before them, Silas realized he was seeing his home with new eyes. For 23 years, the ranch had been a place of memories and ghosts of duty without joy. Now somehow, it looked different, a place of possibility, of life continuing. They rode down to the cabin in the golden light of late afternoon. Everything was as they had left it, though the garden Aya had started showed signs of needing attention. As they unsaddled the horses and turned them out to pasture, Silas felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was where he belonged, where his story would continue. Not alone anymore, but with a companion who understood loss and renewal as deeply as he did. That evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, they sat on the porch steps sharing a simple meal. Neither felt the need to fill the silence with words. There would be time enough for talk in the days ahead, for planning, for building something new from the ashes of the past. After dinner, Silas took out his harmonica, an instrument he hadn't touched in decades. The first notes were hesitant, rusty with disuse, but gradually a melody emerged, a bittersweet tune Margaret had loved. Aya closed her eyes, listening, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When the song ended, she opened her eyes and nodded in approval. "Sarah is smiling," she said simply, "and Margaret too." Silas didn't question how she knew this. Some mysteries were better left unexplored, some faiths better left unchallenged. What mattered was the music, the moment, the sense that after a long, dark winter spring had finally come to his soul. Later, as Aya retired to Sarah's room and Silas prepared for bed in the main room, he paused before the photograph on the mantel. Margaret and Sarah looked back at him, their faces forever young, forever frozen in that moment of happiness. "I've done what I could," he told them softly. "I hope it's enough." He thought of the stone sun now returning to its rightful place among the Crow people. Had it really judged Samuel Hollister and found him wanting? Or had Nathan somehow influenced the outcome? Silas would never know for certain, and found he didn't need to. Justice had been served one way or another. As he lay in bed that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind in the cottonwoods, the occasional hoot of an owl, Silas felt the weight of the past finally lift. The circle that had begun 23 years ago was complete. The debt paid, the accounts settled. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Silas Redwood slept without dreams of fire and blood, without the echoes of gunshots, or the memory of Margaret's last breath against his cheek. Instead, he dreamed of open skies and flowing grass, of horses running free and gardens bursting with life. He dreamed of tomorrow. Epilogue: the first snow of winter dusted the mountains like powdered sugar, the air crisp and clean with the promise of deeper cold to come. Silas stood at the edge of the small cemetery behind the cabin, his breath forming clouds in the morning air. The two crosses that had stood there for 23 years had been replaced with proper headstones ordered from Helena and delivered last week. The polished granite gleamed in the pale sunlight, the names etched deep to withstand the passage of time. Margaret Redwood, beloved wife and mother. Sarah Redwood, cherished daughter. Beneath Margaret's name, a smaller inscription: Margaret Redfeather, keeper of wisdom. Aya had insisted on that addition, and Silas had found he didn't mind. It acknowledged a truth he had come to accept, that his wife had been more than he knew, had lived a life of greater purpose than he had realized. There was no betrayal in that, only an expansion of her legacy. Smoke rose from the cabin chimney where Aya was preparing breakfast. In the months since their return from Chimney Rock Valley, she had brought life back to the ranch in 100 small ways: herbs growing in Margaret's garden, fresh curtains at the windows, the sound of quiet humming as she went about her tasks. They had settled into a comfortable routine, neither servant nor master, but companions in the shared work of the ranch. Silas found strength returning to his body, flexibility to his stiff knee. The chronic pain that had plagued him for decades had diminished, though, whether from the brief contact with the stone sun or simply from having purpose, again he couldn't say. Word had come last week from the Crowlands, a runner bearing news that the stone sun had been safely returned to its sacred resting place, that Nathan had taken up his grandfather's mantle as keeper with Willa as his protector. The tribe had held a ceremony in honor of Margaret Redfeather, acknowledging her sacrifice in the stone's long journey. The runner had also brought a gift, a small carved wooden box similar to the one that had contained Foster's journal and map, but newer. Inside was a bracelet of polished red stones, not the stone sun itself, but similar in color, with a note in Willa's careful handwriting: "For Aya Bridge Between Worlds," and for Silas Redwood, who helped close the circle. Aya wore the bracelet now, the stones occasionally catching the light with a flash of crimson. She said they helped her communicate with the spirits, though Silas suspected this was as much for his benefit as hers, a concession to his need for rational explanation. He had come to accept that some things defied explanation, that the world held mysteries beyond his understanding. It was enough to know that Margaret had deemed these mysteries worth protecting, worth dying for if necessary. Silas placed a small bundle of winter evergreens on each grave, then turned back toward the cabin, where smoke curled invitingly from the chimney and the windows glowed with warm light against the gathering dusk. He was 69 now, no longer young by any measure. But for the first time in decades, he looked forward to the years ahead, however many or few they might be. There was work to be done, stories to share, a legacy to build. As he approached the cabin, Aya appeared in the doorway, her slender form silhouetted against the light within. She raised a hand in greeting, and Silas found himself smiling in return, a genuine smile, not the grim approximation that had been all he could manage for so long. "Breakfast is ready," she called, "and a letter came while you were out, from the territorial governor's office." Silas nodded, quickening his pace slightly. The governor had been corresponding with him recently about serving as a special marshal for the territory, using his experience to train younger lawmen in the changing West. He hadn't given an answer yet, but found himself considering it seriously. There was life in him yet, purpose, the chance to build something to leave the world better than he found it. As he reached the porch steps, a lone eagle circled high overhead, its cry piercing the winter stillness. Aya looked up, her expression softening. "A good sign," she said. "The spirits approve of your path." Silas glanced upward, watching the majestic bird soar on thermal currents, free and powerful against the vast Montana sky. He didn't share Aya's belief in spirits, not exactly, but he found comfort in the possibility that Margaret and Sarah somehow knew his heart was healing, that he had found his way back to life after so long in the shadow of death. "Come inside," Aya said, holding the door open. "It's getting cold." Silas took one last look at the mountains, the ranch, the small cemetery where his past lay at rest. Then he turned and stepped into the warmth of the cabin, closing the door against the gathering winter. Outside, the first snow continued to fall, covering the land in a blanket of pristine white, erasing the scars of the past and preparing the earth for new beginnings when spring returned once more to the Montana hills. End of part 3, 6,000 words.